I knew something was wrong the day my mother-in-law responded to a private conversation she was never part of, and suddenly every breakdown I'd had didn't feel private anymore. My name is Megan Prescott. I'm 32 years old, and 6 months ago I had my first baby. My husband is Joseph Prescott. He's 35. We live just outside Columbus, Ohio, or at least we did. Right now, we're living in his parents' house in Worthington. That part matters more than I realized when I agreed to it. Our son's name is Maverick. He was born after 40 hours of labor that ended in an emergency C-section at Riverside Methodist Hospital. I remember staring at the overhead lights as they rushed me down the hallway, thinking, this wasn't supposed to happen like this. I'd planned everything. The playlist. The breathing techniques. The calm entrance into motherhood. Instead, I felt like I was being pulled out of my own story. Maverick was healthy. Perfect. Loud lungs. Strong grip. Everyone kept saying how lucky we were. I felt lucky. And terrified. When we brought him home to our apartment in Dublin, I couldn't sleep. Even when he slept, I'd lie awake listening for his breathing. I'd check his chest constantly. I'd imagine something happening to him for no reason at all. Fire. SIDS. Dropping him down the stairs. Joseph called it new mom nerves. My doctor called it normal postpartum adjustment. I told myself it would pass. But the anxiety didn't fade. It sharpened. 3 weeks in, Joseph suggested we move in with his parents, just temporarily. They've got space, he said. Mom's retired. You won't be alone all day. It'll help. His parents, Margaret and Thomas Whitmore, no, scratch that, fresh, Margaret and Thomas Caldwell, live in a large 2-story house in Worthington. Clean neighborhood. Manicured lawns. The kind of place where everything looks stable from the outside. Margaret was almost too eager. You'll need more support than you think, she told me, squeezing my hands the first night we stayed over. There's no shame in accepting help. I didn't want to need her. But I was exhausted. So I agreed. At first, it felt like relief. Margaret cooked dinner every night. She folded baby clothes before I even saw the laundry basket. She'd gently take Maverick from my arms and say, "Go shower. You look drained." I told myself she was being kind. But sometimes she corrected how I held him, adjusted how I burped him, repositioned his blanket after I tucked it in. Little things. Small enough that if I complained, I'd look ungrateful. Then she started knowing things. One night, around 11 p.m., Joseph and I were in the upstairs guest room, our room for now, whispering about breastfeeding. Maverick wasn't latching well. I felt embarrassed and frustrated. I feel like I'm already failing, I told Joseph quietly. Like your mom is watching everything I do. He sighed. She's not judging you. It feels like she is. The next morning, Margaret handed me coffee and said, in this measured, soothing voice, breastfeeding doesn't determine whether you're a good mother. Try not to feel like you're failing. My stomach tightened. I hadn't said that to her. I asked Joseph later if he'd mentioned it. No, he said. Why would I? I let it go. Then it happened again. I told Joseph, door closed, white noise machine running, that I might look into therapy because I felt constantly on edge. The next afternoon, Margaret was wiping down the kitchen island when she said, jumping into therapy too quickly can create unnecessary labels. Postpartum hormones can make women think they're unstable. Unstable. The word echoed. I stared at her and asked, carefully, did Joseph say something? She smiled slightly. Mothers notice things. That answer sat wrong in my chest. But the moment everything shifted happened at 2:17 a.m. Maverick wouldn't settle. I was downstairs on the living room couch, lights off, just the soft glow from the hallway nightlight. Joseph had come down to sit next to me. I was exhausted. My incisions still ached when I moved too quickly. I think your mom hates me, I whispered. Barely audible. Joseph rubbed his face. She doesn't hate you. It feels like she's waiting for me to mess up. He didn't answer. The next morning, Margaret handed me a mug and said calmly, Megan, I don't hate you. I just think you're overwhelmed. The exact phrasing. I felt the room tilt slightly. I hadn't said that to her. Joseph swore he hadn't either. That's when the doubt started crawling in. Maybe I said it louder than I thought. Maybe I was sleep-deprived and dramatic. Maybe anxiety was twisting everything. But it kept happening. She referenced a joke Joseph made about moving back to our Dublin apartment by fall. She commented on how I seemed particularly emotional after a private phone call with my sister, Rachel, a call I'd taken alone in the living room while everyone else was out. One afternoon, I was pacing that same living room on the phone with Rachel. I feel like I'm being watched in this house, I told her. Half laughing, half not. After I hung up, the house felt too quiet. I looked around differently. The Caldwell house is modern. Clean lines. Open layout. Minimal clutter. That's when I noticed it. A small black dot near the smoke detector above the archway between the kitchen and living room. It didn't look right. I dragged a dining chair underneath it and climbed up. It wasn't a smoke detector. It was a camera. Small. Sleek. Lens angled directly toward the couch. Toward the spot where I sat every night feeding my son. My mouth went dry. I scanned the room more carefully. Another one tucked discreetly into the bookshelf. Another above the entryway. Not obvious unless you were looking. I stepped down slowly, heart pounding. I called Joseph immediately. There are cameras in the living room, I said. Silence. Then, yeah. My parents have security cameras in the common areas. Do they record audio? A pause. They're standard systems. Joseph. Another pause. Yes. That was the moment something inside me shifted. He knew. He had known the entire time. And I had been whispering my fears inside a house that wasn't just watching, it was listening. That night, for the first time, I didn't feel anxious. I felt exposed. After I found the cameras, nothing exploded. There was no screaming match. No dramatic packing of bags. No one ripping cords out of the wall. It was almost worse than that. It was calm. Joseph came home early that afternoon. I was sitting at the kitchen island when he walked in. The same island where his mother liked to wipe invisible crumbs while making observations about my mental health. We need to talk about this without making it bigger than it is, he said. Without making it bigger than it is. I stared at him. Your parents have been recording our conversations. They're security cameras. They record audio. He exhaled slowly, like I was a difficult client at work. They've had that system for years. It's not new. It's not about you. It felt about me. Margaret came home 20 minutes later. She didn't look surprised to see Joseph home early. She didn't look embarrassed. If anything, she looked composed. I said it plainly. I saw the cameras. Yes, she said. No denial. No apology. They record sound. That's how modern systems work. You've been listening to private conversations. Her jaw tightened just slightly. I don't sit around eavesdropping. But this is my home. I have every right to monitor it. Especially with a newborn here. Monitor. Like I was something that needed oversight. Joseph stepped in. Mom's just being protective. Protective of who? I asked her directly, did you hear me crying the other night? A beat. I check in sometimes, she admitted. You've seemed fragile. There it was again. Fragile. She said it like she was describing a wine glass. I felt heat rush into my face. You've been watching me at night? I glance at the feed, she said. To make sure everything's safe. Safe from what? From me? Thomas had been standing in the doorway, pretending to scroll through his phone. He cleared his throat but didn't say anything. That was his specialty. Quiet neutrality. I asked Margaret, have you shared footage with anyone? She hesitated. Just long enough. Only family. When necessary. My stomach dropped. Later that night, in the guest room, I asked Joseph what she meant by that. He sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his hands together. During Adam's divorce, Mom provided some footage. What kind of footage? Just arguments. Lindsay yelling. And it was used in court? He didn't look at me. It helped Adam. Helped. I felt something sharp in my chest. So your mom has experience collecting recordings and using them in custody disputes, I said slowly. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. He stood up then, frustrated. You're twisting this. No. I'm connecting dots. He ran his hand through his hair. You're not Adam. We're not getting divorced. That wasn't the point. The point was that I was living inside a house with a documented history of surveillance being used strategically. The next morning, everything was too normal. Margaret made blueberry pancakes. She asked if I'd slept better. She offered to take Maverick for a walk so I could rest my nerves. I started noticing the cameras everywhere. Not just in the living room. There was one angled toward the front door, one above the back patio, one in the hallway outside the guest bedroom. Common areas. Technically not illegal. But suddenly I was hyper-aware of my tone. My posture. The way I picked up Maverick. The way I sighed when he cried. I caught myself lowering my voice instinctively. I took phone calls in my car. One afternoon, I decided to test something. I stood directly under the living room camera and said, "Clearly, I'm feeling a lot better today. Really stable." It felt ridiculous. Like performing. The next day, Margaret smiled at me over her coffee. "I'm glad you're feeling more stable." The word again. That wasn't coincidence. That was confirmation. That night, I confronted Joseph again. "She's listening," I said. "She checks in. She's listening." He looked exhausted. "Even if she is, what do you want me to do?" "It's their house. Unplug them." That would start a war. "So we're just supposed to accept this?" "It's temporary." Everything was temporary to him. But the anxiety wasn't. 2 days later, I overheard something that made my skin crawl. I was coming down the stairs when I heard Margaret in her home office. The door was cracked open. "She's very emotional," she was saying. "Yes. I've noticed patterns." Patterns. I froze. She lowered her voice, but I caught, "I just want to make sure Maverick is protected." Protected. I stepped back before she could see me. When she came out of the office, she smiled like nothing had happened. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying Adam's divorce in my head. Lindsay losing primary custody. Footage of arguments being framed as instability. I wasn't yelling, but I was crying sometimes. I was pacing. I was overwhelmed. How easy would it be to clip 30 seconds of that and make it look like something else? A few days later, Margaret made an offhand comment that didn't feel offhand at all. "If nights are hard for you," she said while rocking Maverick, "I can start taking him overnight. You need uninterrupted rest. It's important for mothers who are struggling." Struggling. Joseph didn't react. I felt like I was standing on a ledge and he didn't even see it. "I'm not struggling," I said carefully. She smiled. "Of course you are. All new mothers do." That sentence sounded harmless. But it didn't feel harmless. It felt like documentation. And for the first time, I started wondering if the cameras weren't just about security. Maybe they were about narrative. And maybe I wasn't just being monitored. Maybe I was being evaluated. Something changed in me after I overheard Margaret say the word patterns. It wasn't panic. It was clarity. If I was being observed, then I needed to see what happened when I stopped shrinking. Up until that point, I'd been quiet. Careful. I'd lowered my voice instinctively under the cameras. I'd taken calls in my car. I'd avoided showing frustration when Maverick wouldn't settle. But one afternoon, standing under that tiny black lens in the living room, I felt this wave of anger rise up. Not dramatic anger. Cold anger. I adjusted Maverick on my hip and said, "Clearly, I am not unstable." My voice echoed slightly in the open space. No one responded. But the house didn't feel neutral anymore. That evening, Margaret knocked gently on our bedroom door. "Can we talk?" she asked. Joseph was in the shower. It was just me and her. She sat at the edge of the guest bed like a principal about to address a student. "I know this transition has been hard for you," she began. I can sense tension. "I don't feel tension," I said carefully. "I feel watched." Her smile didn't fully reach her eyes. "Megan, this is my home. I've always had security measures in place. That hasn't changed. What has changed is that I'm breastfeeding and crying in your living room." She clasped her hands together. "You're emotional because you're healing." There it was again. Framing. "Do you review footage regularly?" I asked. "I check the system when I feel it's necessary." "What does necessary mean?" She paused. Just long enough to remind me she controlled the answer. "When I see behavior that concerns me." Concerned her. I swallowed. "What behavior?" She tilted her head slightly. "Restlessness." Mood swings. Raising your voice. I haven't raised my voice. She didn't argue. She just gave me that tight, professional smile. It hit me then that she wasn't reacting emotionally. She was documenting. That night, I told Joseph everything. She's building a case, I said. For what? He snapped. You think she's plotting to take our kid? I think she believes she'd be a more stable caregiver if something happened. That's insane. Is it? She already helped Adam in court. That was different. Was it? Joseph paced the room. You're letting anxiety turn this into something it's not. And you're letting loyalty blind you. That shut him up for a second. He rubbed his face and said, Mom isn't malicious. I don't think she sees herself as malicious. That was the problem. The next week, things escalated in quieter ways. Margaret started making comments in front of Thomas. Megan seemed very overwhelmed last night, she'd say casually over dinner. Or Maverick was crying for quite a while before she responded. That one wasn't even true. Thomas would nod vaguely and change the subject. But the seed would be planted. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen when Margaret said, almost sweetly, postpartum depression can manifest in subtle neglect. Not intentional. Just exhaustion. I felt my throat tighten. Are you implying I'm neglecting my son? I'm saying it's something to be mindful of. Mindful. Every word she chose was careful. I decided to test something more directly. That evening, while Joseph was downstairs and Margaret was in her office, I gently unplugged the living room camera from its power source. It didn't take much. Just a quick reach behind the bookshelf. 10 minutes later, Margaret appeared in the doorway. The living room camera is offline, she said calmly. I looked at her. It must have gotten bumped. Her gaze lingered on me. I prefer all systems active, she replied. Why? For liability. That word made my stomach flip. Liability for what? She didn't answer directly. It protects everyone. Everyone. Joseph came into the room mid-conversation. What's going on? Nothing, Margaret said lightly. Just a technical issue. She plugged the camera back in herself. That night, Joseph confronted me. Did you unplug it? Yes. Why would you do that without telling me? Because I wanted to see how fast she'd notice. And? 10 minutes. He went quiet. I could see the calculation happening in his head. She monitors the system more than she admits, I said. He didn't argue that part. But he still wouldn't take my side fully. You're escalating this, he said finally. She's escalating it. Megan, we're guests. There it was again. Guests. Guests don't get privacy. Guests don't get to decide how their breakdowns are framed. The real turning point came 3 days later. I had a pediatrician appointment for Maverick in Dublin. I decided to go alone. While I was there, Dr. Patel asked casually, how are you feeling emotionally? I hesitated. Then I told the truth. I feel like I'm being evaluated in my own home. She frowned slightly. Evaluated how? I almost said it. Almost told her about the cameras. But something stopped me. Instead, I said, I'm just overwhelmed. She suggested therapy. Gently. No labels. No judgment. When I got back to the house, Margaret was in the kitchen. How did the appointment go? She asked. Fine. She didn't suggest anything additional, did she? My stomach dropped. How would you know she might? Margaret's expression didn't shift. Many doctors are quick to suggest treatment. Treatment. I hadn't told anyone what Dr. Patel asked me. Not Joseph. Not Rachel. Which meant one of two things. Either Margaret was guessing, or she'd heard enough of my previous conversations to anticipate the trajectory. That night, Joseph and I had our first real fight. Not whispering. Not careful. I can't live like this, I said. You're acting like we're under surveillance by the government. We are under surveillance. It's my parents. And I'm your wife. He looked torn in a way that scared me more than anger would have. I just need this to stay calm, he said quietly. Calm for who? Because it wasn't calm for me. Margaret knocked on the door mid-argument. Everything okay? She asked. Her tone was composed. Controlled. Listening. And for the first time, I wondered if she had heard every word. The moment I realized this wasn't just paranoia was the day I saw the folder. Up until then, everything could still be explained away. Overprotective mother-in-law. Sensitive postpartum brain. Bad communication. But the folder made it real. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Joseph was at work. Thomas was out running errands. Margaret was in the backyard trimming something that did not need trimming. Maverick had finally fallen asleep upstairs, and I went looking for a spare charging cable because mine had disappeared again. Margaret's home office door was half open. I wasn't snooping. At least, I didn't think I was. But I saw my name, typed, on a manila folder sitting on her desk. M. Prescott. My stomach tightened. I stepped closer. It wasn't thick. Not some dramatic file packed with evidence. Just a slim folder. I shouldn't have opened it. I did. Inside were printed still images. Black and white snapshots. From the security system. Timestamps in the corner. One was me pacing the living room at 1:42 a.m., Maverick crying in my arms. Another was me sitting on the couch, head in my hands. Another was me standing near the kitchen sink, shoulders slumped. None of them looked dramatic. But none of them looked good either. Under each photo was a handwritten note in Margaret's careful, principal-style script. Extended crying episode. Restless behavior. Appears overwhelmed. My hands started shaking. This wasn't checking in. This was categorizing. I flipped through quickly. There were maybe 10 pages. Not hundreds. But enough to show intention. Enough to show pattern. I heard the back door slide open. I shoved the papers back inside and stepped away from the desk just as Margaret's footsteps came down the hallway. She stopped when she saw me near the office. "Did you need something?" she asked. Her voice was neutral. "I was looking for a charger," I said. Her eyes flicked to the desk for half a second. Then back to me. That was all I needed. She knew. That night, I didn't wait. I told Joseph everything. "She has a folder," I said. "With screenshots. Notes." He stared at me. "What?" "She's documenting me." "That's not possible." I saw it. He shook his head. "You must have misunderstood. She labeled it with my name." He went pale. We went downstairs together. Margaret was in the living room, rocking Maverick. Joseph didn't ease into it. "Mom, do you have a file on Megan?" Margaret didn't flinch. "I keep notes," she said calmly. "For what?" "For my own peace of mind." Joseph blinked. "Peace of mind about what?" She stood slowly, handing Maverick to him. "I am responsible for what happens in this house," she said. "If I observe concerning behavior, I document it." "Concerning behavior?" I repeated. "You've been fragile," she said. "Emotionally volatile at times." "I have not been volatile." "You unplugged a security device without permission." "That's volatile?" "You've raised your voice." I raised my voice once. Joseph looked between us, like a referee losing control of the game. "Mom," he said quietly, "why are you documenting my wife?" Margaret didn't look defensive. She looked disappointed. "Because if something were to happen," she said, "I need to be prepared." "Prepared? For what?" I demanded. "For the possibility that Maverick's environment becomes unstable." The room went silent. Thomas had entered from the hallway and stopped mid-step. "You think I'm unstable?" I asked. "I think you're struggling," she replied evenly. "And struggling mothers sometimes need intervention." Intervention. Joseph stepped forward. "What kind of intervention are you talking about?" Margaret folded her hands. "If Megan's mental state deteriorates, I would not hesitate to ensure Maverick is protected." Protected. There it was again. "And how exactly would you do that?" I asked, my voice shaking now. She didn't answer directly. She didn't have to. We all knew. Court. Custody. Documentation. Joseph looked stunned. "You'd take our son?" he asked. "I would step in if necessary." "You already helped Adam do this," I said. "That situation was different. But you did it." She didn't deny it. That night, Joseph and I didn't argue. We sat in the dark. "I didn't know about the folder," he said finally. "But you knew about the cameras." He didn't respond. The next morning, Margaret acted like nothing had happened. She made coffee. She asked if Maverick had slept well. But something had shifted. The kindness felt strategic now. Measured. Later that afternoon, she said casually, "I've been researching postpartum mood disorders. It's important to act early." I felt something crack inside me. Not fear. resolve. Because this wasn't subtle anymore. This wasn't misunderstanding. She was preparing. And for the first time, I stopped wondering if I was overreacting. I started wondering how quickly I needed to leave. After the folder, the house didn't feel tense. It felt strategic. Margaret stopped saying words like fragile to my face. She became softer, more sympathetic, almost clinical in her kindness. I made you an appointment recommendation, she said one morning, sliding a card across the counter. A therapist who specializes in postpartum instability. Instability. I didn't touch the card. Joseph was there for that one. He looked at the card, then at me. We'll handle medical decisions ourselves, he said quietly. Margaret smiled like he'd just told a joke. Of course. I'm just offering support. Support had started to sound like surveillance. That afternoon, I told Joseph we needed to leave. Not next month. Not by winter. Now. We still have the apartment in Dublin, I reminded him. The lease doesn't end for another 3 months. It's smaller, he said automatically. I don't care. It's going to upset them. I don't care. He ran his hands through his hair. You think leaving won't escalate this? She's already escalating it. He didn't argue that. What scared me wasn't Margaret's folder anymore. It was Joseph's hesitation. Not denial. Not anger. Hesitation. Like he was weighing things. Like this was a logistics problem instead of a boundary violation. That night, while Margaret and Thomas were watching TV, I started packing. Not dramatically. Not throwing things into boxes. Just folding Maverick's onesies into our suitcase. Margaret noticed within 20 minutes. She appeared in the doorway of the guest room. Are you going somewhere? She asked calmly. Yes, I said. Back to our apartment. For how long? I don't know. Joseph stepped in behind her. He looked pale. Mom, he started, we think it's best if we have our own space. Margaret's face didn't change. I see, she said. No anger. That would have been easier. Instead, she walked into the room slowly. I've done nothing but support you, she said. And this is how you respond? You documented me, I said. You created a file. For accountability. I'm not an employee. You're a mother struggling with emotional regulation. The air left my lungs. Joseph said, sharper now, stop. Margaret turned to him. Joseph, you know she hasn't been herself. That landed harder than anything else. Not because it was cruel. Because it was almost true. I haven't been myself. But being anxious is not the same as being dangerous. I am not a risk to my son, I said. Margaret's voice softened. I don't believe you would intentionally harm him. Intentionally. The word felt surgical. But accidents happen when people are overwhelmed, she continued. Fatigue impairs judgment. Thomas stepped forward then, finally speaking. Margaret. But he didn't finish the sentence. Joseph looked torn in a way that made my stomach drop. I'm leaving, I said quietly. With Maverick, Margaret added. Yes. She inhaled slowly. You should consider how this looks. How it looks. You're emotional. You're making impulsive decisions. Removing a newborn from a stable environment. Stable. That word again. This is not your decision, Joseph said firmly. Margaret looked at him for a long moment. Of course it isn't, she replied. But she didn't look convinced. The next morning, Joseph loaded the car. Margaret didn't try to physically stop us. She didn't need to. As I buckled Maverick into his car seat, she said gently, I hope you're making this choice from clarity, not from fear. I didn't answer. The drive back to Dublin felt surreal. Our apartment was exactly how we left it. Slightly dusty. Quiet. Small. Private. For the first time in weeks, I whispered something without wondering who might hear it. I'm not crazy, I told Joseph. He didn't respond immediately. I know, he said finally. But the way he said it sounded like he was convincing himself. 2 days later, Margaret texted Joseph. Just one line. Given recent instability, I think it's important we discuss Maverick's long-term safety. He showed me the message. We both stared at it. There was no threat. Just suggestion. Which felt worse. Joseph called her immediately. I could hear her voice through the phone, calm and measured. I'm not attacking Megan, she said. I'm being proactive. Proactive. He hung up looking shaken. She thinks we're overreacting, he said. She thinks I'm unstable, I replied. He didn't argue that either. That night, while Maverick slept in his crib in our tiny apartment bedroom, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. We were out of the house, but we weren't out of reach. Because the folder still existed. The footage still existed. And Margaret believed she was protecting her grandson, which meant she believed she was justified. Joseph rolled toward me in the dark. "We'll be fine," he said. But his voice didn't sound certain. And for the first time since all of this started, I wasn't afraid of the cameras anymore. I was afraid of what happens when someone truly believes they're right. 3 weeks after we moved back to Dublin, I almost started to believe it was over. No cameras. No footsteps outside the guest room door. No carefully chosen words like fragile or unstable floating across the kitchen island. It was just our small apartment. 2 bedrooms. Thin walls. The hum of traffic outside. Maverick's monitor glowing softly at night. Privacy felt strange at first. Then it felt necessary. Joseph and I settled into a fragile rhythm. He went to work downtown. I stayed home with Maverick. I scheduled therapy, not because Margaret suggested it, but because I needed someone neutral. Someone who didn't have a folder. Dr. Hayes didn't label me. She didn't say unstable. She said exhausted. Hypervigilant. Overwhelmed. Normal words. I started sleeping a little better. And then the certified letter arrived. It was addressed to Joseph. Return address, Margaret Caldwell. My hands went cold before I even opened it. Inside was a typed document. Formal. Structured. Not emotional. It wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't custody papers. It was a statement of concern. She had outlined observations about my postpartum adjustment. She referenced dates. Descriptions of late-night pacing. Episodes of visible distress. Raised voice in the presence of infant. Attached were 3 printed screenshots. The same ones from the folder. At the bottom she wrote, "This is not a threat. It is documentation should future intervention become necessary. My priority remains Maverick's well-being." Joseph read it twice. "She's protecting herself," he said quietly. "From what? In case something happens." Nothing is happening. She thinks something might. That was the problem. Margaret didn't see herself as controlling. She saw herself as responsible. Joseph called her that night. I listened from the hallway. "You sent documentation?" he asked. Her voice through the speaker was calm. "Yes. Transparency is important." "You're implying Megan is a risk." "I'm implying she has been emotionally inconsistent." "She's in therapy." "That's good," Margaret said. "That shows awareness." Awareness. Joseph's jaw tightened. "You're not taking our son." "I have no intention of doing anything unless forced to." "Forced?" "You're forcing this," he said. "No, Joseph," she replied evenly. "I am preparing." He hung up and leaned against the kitchen counter. I'd never seen him look that torn. "She thinks she's right," he said. "I know." 2 days later, Margaret showed up at our apartment unannounced. She didn't try to come inside. She just stood outside the door when Joseph opened it. "I don't want hostility," she said. "I want stability." "We have stability," I said from behind him. She looked past him at me. "You look tired," she observed. "So do most mothers." Her eyes shifted to Maverick's car seat by the couch. "I am not your enemy," she said quietly. "But if I ever believe Maverick is unsafe, I will act." There it was. Not dramatic. Not screaming. Just certainty. Joseph stepped forward slightly. "Mom, you're not acting on hypotheticals." "I hope I never have to," she replied. She left without raising her voice. Without slamming a door. Which somehow made it heavier. That night, Joseph and I sat on the couch long after Maverick fell asleep. "She won't stop," I said. "She thinks she's helping." "That doesn't make it better." He rubbed his temples. "If we cut her off completely, she'll escalate. If we don't, she'll keep documenting." He didn't argue. The next week, I found out from Rachel that Margaret had called her. Not aggressively. Not accusing. Just asking questions. "How has Megan seemed lately? Has she been sleeping? Any mood swings I should be aware of?" Rachel told her nothing. But the fact that she tried made my skin crawl. Margaret was expanding her circle of documentation. I went to therapy that afternoon and said something out loud I hadn't fully admitted. I don't trust my husband to choose me over her. It tasted bitter. Joseph loves me, but he also loves his mother. And she believes she is protecting her grandson. That belief is stronger than logic. Last Sunday, Joseph suggested something that made my chest tighten. Maybe we should sit down with her, he said. All three of us. Set boundaries clearly. And if she doesn't respect them, she might. And if she doesn't? He didn't answer. Because that's the part we don't say. If she doesn't, then what? Restraining order? Court? Estrangement? Or do we just live like this forever, carefully, strategically, aware that somewhere there's a folder with my name on it? Tonight, I'm sitting in our apartment living room. No cameras. No blinking red lights. Maverick is asleep in his crib. Joseph is in the bedroom, staring at his phone. Probably reading another text from her. I should feel relieved. We left. We have space. But I don't feel safe. Because the footage still exists. The screenshots still exist. And Margaret is still absolutely convinced she's right. Joseph says we need to keep things calm. Margaret says she's being proactive. I say I want privacy. And somewhere in the middle of all that is my son. So here's what I don't know. Do I push for no contact and risk turning this into the very legal situation she seems prepared for? Or do I keep playing calm and hope she never decides it's time to act? Because the scariest part isn't the cameras anymore. It's that she truly believes she'd be the more stable parent. And I don't know if my husband is strong enough to prove her wrong.